What they found when they finally lifted the vault door was a scene of considerable disorder. Inside were a number of coffins, most of them broken open, their contents disturbed and scattered across the floor of the chamber in a way that suggested sustained violence over a long period of time. Welcome to the Night Visitors, where we share purportedly true accounts of interactions with vampires and other supernatural predators. I'm James, a paranormal researcher and lifelong vampire enthusiast, coming to you from Transylvania. The following episode of The Night Visitors is based on historical accounts. I want to start this episode a little differently than usual because this one brings back fond childhood memories. When I was in 3rd grade, I got my hands on a copy of More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz, and one of the stories that stuck with me the most was titled The Window. I didn't know until years later that The Window was Schwartz's retelling of a much older story, one set in a real place, featuring real people, documented in a Victorian autobiography, and still debated by historians and folklorists to this day. The story is known as The Vampire of Croglin Grange, and it comes from the county of Cumbria in the north of England, bordering on Scotland. Before delving into the story, I would like to point out that there are researchers and academics that consider this account a piece of Victorian embellishment, a good after-dinner story that got polished into legend over decades of retelling. I've read the skeptics, and I take their arguments seriously. But there are also those who have investigated the physical location, interviewed local families, and have come away believing that something happened in that part of Cumberland, possibly as far back as the 1680s. I can't settle the question of the veracity of this account tonight, but what I can tell you is that this story has stayed with me since I was 8 years old, and I think it deserves to be told on this podcast. So here it is. The story comes to us through Augustus Hare, a Victorian writer and raconteur who included it in his 6-volume autobiography, Story of My Life, published in 1896. Hare claimed to have heard this story from a Captain Fisher Rowe at a dinner party on the eve of Fisher's own wedding. The captain had been listening to Hare tell ghost stories and apparently, unwilling to be outdone, offered up an account that he said was connected to his own family and to a property his people had held for hundreds of years in Cumberland, in a remote corner of England. The place was called Croglin Grange. It was a long one-level house, unusual for its kind in that it had only one story, no upper floor, just a single line of rooms stretching out across the land with a terrace in front of the wide grounds that sloped away toward a church in the hollow below. The Fisher family had eventually outgrown it and relocated south to Surrey, but rather than let the house sit empty, they leased it out. The tenants who took it on were 3 siblings, a sister, whom later retellings of the story would name Amelia, and her 2 brothers. They moved in during the spring and found the house to their liking. Amelia settled into the rhythm of the place quickly. She was, by all accounts, practical and capable and not particularly given to flights of imagination. She slept with her window open on warm nights, as most people did, and thought nothing of it. The first night it happened was a summer night, hot and still, and she had been lying awake in the heat when she noticed something at the window. She lay still for a moment, watching, trying to make sense of what she was looking at. The night outside was bright with moonlight, and she could see well enough. There was a shape at the glass. It was not an animal. It moved deliberately, as if watching her. And as it reached the window, she could see a face, brown, dried, ancient-looking, with eyes that caught the moonlight reflecting it back like those of a cat. She tried to scream but found that she could not. She lay rigid while it worked at the lead lattice on the window, picking at it with long fingers until the latch gave, and then it was in the room, and it was on her, and what it did to her throat she would later describe only as a crude bite, after which she managed to scream, causing her brothers to come running, and the thing turned and moved back through the window and was gone across the grounds in the direction of the churchyard. Her brothers found the tracks in the morning, leading down through the field and stopping, apparently, at the churchyard wall. Amelia recovered. She was shaken badly enough that her brothers insisted on taking her to Switzerland for several months. They traveled through the Alps, giving Amelia a much-needed rest after that stressful ordeal. After a while, she was ready to return to England, and she reminded her brothers that they had leased Croglin Grange for 7 years, and they'd only stayed 1. And a house of that particular kind was not going to be easy to sublet. She assured them that it was just one incident and she was not going to live her life in fear. So they returned in the autumn, and Amelia took the same room. She made sure the shutters were latched each night. There was one bottom section of the window that the shutters didn't quite reach, an architectural feature of old houses, but the shutters covered everything else, and she considered that sufficient. She slept well enough through the winter and into the following year, and the spring came, and she began to accept that the whole ordeal was behind them. It was not. The creature came back in the spring, but this time her brothers were ready. One of them had slept with a pistol within reach since their return to the Grange, a precaution that he had started to feel almost unnecessary until the night it suddenly wasn't. He heard his sisters cry and he moved fast, and he managed to shoot the thing in the leg, the opening at the bottom of the shutters, before it cleared the window and vanished again into the darkness. In the morning, the brothers gathered several of the tenant farmers from the surrounding land and went to the churchyard. The tracks in the damp earth led to an old vault set into the far end of the grounds. They did not open the vault that day. Hare's account is specific on this. They waited until full daylight of the following morning, which suggests that they had an idea of what they were about to find. What they found when they finally lifted the vault door was a scene of considerable disorder. Inside were a number of coffins, most of them broken open, their contents disturbed and scattered across the floor of the chamber in a way that suggested sustained violence over a long period of time. But one coffin was intact. Its lid had been moved but not removed. It lay loose, not sealed. They lifted it. Inside was a figure, brown, withered, desiccated, mummified in fact, but completely cold. And in the leg there was a bullet, the same bullet that the brother had fired into it. The brothers and the group of farmers did the only thing that they knew could destroy a man. They burned it. Whether any of this happened is a question that researchers have been turning over for more than a century. And I think it's worth spending a moment on what they've found, because the story of the investigation is almost as interesting as the story itself. The first serious challenge came in 1924 when a writer named Charles G. Harper visited the area and could find no building matching the description of Croglin Grange. He did find 2 places, Croglin High Hall and Croglin Low Hall, and eventually concluded that Croglin Low Hall was probably what Hare had been describing, though the geography didn't match cleanly, and there was no vault in the churchyard corresponding to the one in the story. Later, a researcher named Francis Clive Ross found something more interesting. He discovered that Croglin Low Hall had actually been known as Croglin Grange until the early 1700s, that the house had originally been single-story before a second floor was added, and that a chapel had indeed stood nearby, its foundation stubs still visible if you know where to look. He also spoke with local residents who had told him that the story as Hare had recorded it contained a significant error about the date. It hadn't happened in the 1800s, they said. It had happened in the 1680s, nearly 2 centuries earlier, which would place it well before the Victorian vampire fiction that skeptics often point to as the story's probable source. A local woman named Mrs. Parkin from the nearby village of Ainstable told Clive Ross that she had personally known a descendant of the Fisher family, born in the 1860s, old enough to have heard the story from his own grandparents, and that the deed to the property confirmed the name Croglin Grange in use until 1720. None of this proves anything. The vault is gone. There are no parish records of the kind that would settle the matter, no newspaper accounts, no corroborating documentation from the period in question. What remains is the story itself, and the physical landscape of a real place, and the persistence of local memory. I think about the 8-year-old version of myself reading this story in the school library and how captivated I was by the descriptions of the desiccated vampire with its glowing eyes. And I feel like this story contributed in some way to me becoming a researcher of vampires and all things supernatural, and that was reason enough for me to share it here tonight. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode. If you happen to be viewing this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you would like to share your own personal encounter with the undead, please contact me at thenightvisitorsvrs@gmail.com or share here in the comments section. Thank you for listening. A special thanks to composer Tim Kulig for our intro music, Haunted House. You can find The Night Visitors on your favorite podcast platform and thenightvisitors.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter where you will receive each week's episode directly in your inbox, as well as articles on vampire lore and vampires in popular culture.